On Christmas Eve last year, at exactly 8:17 p.m., my mother slapped me across the face because I handed her a check for $50,000 instead of $60,000. The sound wasn't loud, but it was precise, the kind of cold, clean impact that makes a room go silent in less than 1 second. If you've ever had a moment where your entire childhood suddenly rearranged itself in your mind like falling dominoes, you know what I mean. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. If you gave your family $50,000 for Christmas, and they called you ungrateful for it, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, because at that moment, I genuinely didn't know whether I wanted to scream, laugh, or just disappear. And if stories about toxic families, emotional justice, and quiet revenge speak to you, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, because this story didn't end with that slap. It only started there. My name is Natalie Brooke Jensen. I'm 29 years old and I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I work as a licensed dental hygienist. It's not glamorous, but it pays well, about $82,000 a year, before bonuses. And I picked it for one simple reason. It was stable. Stability mattered to me because my childhood never was. I don't remember my mother, Carol Ann Jensen, ever giving me a Christmas present. Not one. I remember the year I was 6. Sitting cross-legged on our living room floor in a thrift store sweater that smelled faintly like detergent and someone else's perfume. My older sister, Rebecca Lynn Jensen, 2 years older, always perfectly dressed, had a pile of gifts stacked almost as tall as she was. Pink dollhouses, a brand new bike with white tires, a jewelry box that played music when it opened. I got a folded pair of socks. My mother said, "You should be grateful. Some children get nothing." I believed her. When you're a kid, you assume love is something you earn. Rebecca didn't have to earn it. She just received. By the time I was 12, I had already figured out the unspoken rule in our house. Rebecca was the investment. I was the backup generator. She got piano lessons that cost $300 a month. I got a part-time job babysitting at 13. She went to summer art camps. I paid for my own school supplies. Every Christmas followed the same pattern. Rebecca opened gifts. I watched. And my mother always said the same sentence every year, like a ritual. "You're the strong one, Natalie. You don't need things." At 16, I started working full-time hours at a grocery store after school. At 18, I moved out. Not because I wanted independence, but because staying meant becoming something worse than invisible. It meant becoming useful. And usefulness, in my family, was the most dangerous role of all. You see, once I graduated dental hygiene school at 23 and got my first real job, something shifted. Suddenly, my mother started calling me more often, not to ask how I was, to ask how much I was making. Rebecca, meanwhile, had dropped out of her 3rd college program and was living at home. My mother described her as finding herself. She described me as the one who can help. The first time she asked for money, it was for Rebecca's career opportunity, $10,000. I sent it. The second time, it was for home repairs, $15,000. I sent that too. By the time I was 27, sending money had become a yearly ritual. Every December, my mother would call. She never said, "Merry Christmas." She would say, "So what are you planning to give the family this year?" The number slowly crept up. $20,000, $35,000, $40,000, then $60,000 last year. It wasn't just money. It was control, disguised as obligation. And I told myself it was temporary. That one day, Rebecca would stand on her own. That one day, my mother would say thank you. That one day, I would finally feel like a daughter instead of a resource. But Christmas Eve last year proved something I had refused to see for almost 3 decades. In our house, I was never a daughter. I was an ATM with a pulse. When I walked into my mother's living room that night, the house smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted ham. Rebecca was sitting on the couch wearing a silk red dress. Her nails were done, her hair styled. She looked like someone who had spent the day preparing to be admired. My mother didn't hug me. She didn't ask about my drive. She simply held out her hand and said, "Did you bring it?" No hello, no eye contact, just expectation. I handed her the envelope. She opened it immediately. The moment she saw the number, her face changed. Not to disappointment, to fury. "You're $10,000 short," she said flatly. I told her calmly that I'd had unexpected student loan payments and medical expenses. That $50,000 was still a lot. That I hoped she understood. And that's when she slapped me. Rebecca didn't look shocked. She didn't look uncomfortable. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. If you can't afford to take care of us properly, maybe you shouldn't pretend you're successful. The room felt like it shrank. My cheek burned. But something deeper inside me went cold. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. Because in that moment, I realized something I had never fully allowed myself to admit. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as income. And the second that income dropped, even slightly, I became disposable. I stood there for a long time without speaking. My mother was still ranting about gratitude and sacrifice. Rebecca was scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. And that's when I noticed something strange on the coffee table. A stack of documents, legal looking, with my name printed on the top page. I hadn't seen them before, and neither of them had tried to hide them. At the time, I didn't say anything. But that stack of papers would end up explaining why my mother believed she had the right to slap me over $10,000. And why that Christmas wasn't actually about money at all. The first Sunday of January, exactly 9 days after my mother slapped me over $10,000, I pulled my bank statements from the past 5 years and printed all 47 pages. I didn't cry while I did it. I highlighted. There's something about seeing numbers in black and white that removes emotion from the equation. Wire transfers don't lie. Checks don't exaggerate. Over 5 years, I had sent my mother a total of $312,000. $312,000. That was more than the down payment on a lake house in Minnesota, more than Rebecca had ever earned in her entire life. And yet somehow, I was the selfish one. If you've ever been the responsible sibling, the strong one, tell me this. When did strong start meaning silent? Because I was starting to realize that silence had cost me more than money. It had cost me clarity. That stack of papers on the coffee table hadn't left my mind. I could still see my name typed across the top page. Clean, official, like something filed with the county. I replayed the scene in my head over and over. Why hadn't they hidden it? Why hadn't my mother moved it out of sight? Unless she assumed I already knew. Or worse, unless she assumed I'd never question it. 3 days after Christmas, my mother texted me like nothing had happened. Are you coming by next week? We need to discuss something important. No apology, no acknowledgement, just business. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I called the Hennepin County Recorder's Office. I asked if any property records were associated with my name. The woman on the phone was polite, efficient. She asked me to spell it twice. There was a pause. Then she said, "Yes, I see something filed 18 months ago." 18 months. My stomach tightened. "What is it?" I asked. "It appears to be a co-signed refinancing agreement tied to a residential property." I don't remember breathing for a few seconds. "I never co-signed anything," I said. There was another pause. Papers shuffling. "Well, your signature is here." I drove downtown that afternoon and paid $26 for certified copies. I sat in my car afterward and read every line. The house, my childhood home, had been refinanced for $420,000. My name was listed as co-borrower. My income was documented. My credit was attached. And the signature at the bottom, it looked like mine. Almost. Layer 1. There was the betrayal. I knew my mother used me financially, but this was different. This wasn't asking. This was taking. And the worst part? The refinance date was from 1.5 years ago, which meant the $60,000 I had given her last Christmas and the $50,000 this year weren't keeping the house afloat. They were something else, covering something else. I called my bank. I asked for the original loan application details. They couldn't release everything without formal dispute paperwork, but they confirmed one thing. The refinance had paid off substantial credit card debt in Rebecca's name. Over $96,000. $96,000. I leaned back in my seat and stared at the winter sky. Rebecca had no stable job, no business, no assets. So how did she rack up nearly $100,000 in debt? And why had my mother used my credit to erase it? I didn't confront them immediately. Not yet, because something inside me had shifted since Christmas Eve. Before, I reacted emotionally. Now, I wanted information. There's a difference between being hurt and being strategic, and I was done being hurt. 2 days later, my mother called again. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "We need to talk about the trust," she said. The trust. We didn't have a trust. At least, I didn't think we did. "What trust?" I asked calmly. "The family trust. The one your father set up before he passed." My father had died when I was 15. I remembered hospital rooms, insurance paperwork, but no trust. "I've never seen it," I said. "Well, that's because you never asked," she replied. That sentence landed differently than she intended. You never asked. As if transparency was my responsibility. As if secrecy was normal. She invited me over the following Saturday to go over documents. Documents. Plural. The word sat heavy in my chest. Before hanging up, she added casually, "Rebecca will be there. We want everything clear before the next holiday season." The next holiday season. As if the slap had been a minor accounting error. As if I would simply resume my role. That night, I ran my credit report. There it was. The refinance loan. $397,000 remaining balance. 30-year term. My name fully attached. My credit score had dipped 42 points since the loan originated. 42 points. I hadn't noticed because I wasn't applying for anything. Because I trusted them. Trust without verification is self-sabotage. That sentence formed in my head, sharp and clean. It felt like something I would say later, maybe publicly, maybe at the right moment. I also noticed something else. There had been a second inquiry on my credit 6 months ago from a different lender. No loan attached, just an inquiry, which meant someone had attempted to apply for something else in my name and failed. That was the moment the anger finally arrived. Not loud, not explosive, just steady, measured. The kind of anger that builds plans. I scheduled a consultation with a financial fraud attorney for the following Thursday. Retainer fee. $5,000, worth every cent. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell Rebecca. I showed up to their Saturday meeting exactly on time. Snow falling lightly outside. Rebecca greeted me with an exaggerated hug. "You've been distant," she said. My mother was already seated at the dining table, documents spread out neatly. And there it was, the same stack I had seen on Christmas Eve. Only this time, the top page wasn't face down. It was facing me. The title read, Jensen Family Revocable Trust. My name was listed. Rebecca's name was listed. And under beneficiary percentages, there was something that made my pulse slow to an almost dangerous calm. I didn't say anything yet, because what I saw on that page didn't match the story they had told me my entire life. And if I was right, the slap on Christmas Eve wasn't about $10,000. It was about fear. And they had no idea what I had already discovered. The Saturday after New Year's, at exactly 11:06 a.m., my mother slid a thick binder across the dining table toward me and said, "You need to understand your responsibilities now that you're almost 30. The binder weighed at least 3 pounds. Heavy, like something meant to intimidate rather than inform. I didn't touch it immediately because I had already seen enough to know this wasn't about transparency. It was about control. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. If you discovered your family had been making legal decisions in your name without telling you, would you confront them right away? Or would you wait and gather proof first? Because in that moment, every instinct inside me said the same thing. Stay calm. Let them talk. Rebecca sat across from me, scrolling through her phone with glossy red nails tapping the screen. My mother, Carol Ann Jensen, folded her hands like she was about to conduct a business meeting. "You know your father wanted everything kept in the family," she began. That sentence alone was a warning sign. Because whenever my mother invoked my father's name, it meant she was about to justify something questionable. "He created the Jensen Family Revocable Trust before he died," she continued. "It protects the house and ensures stability." I opened the binder slowly. The first page listed the trustee, Carol Ann Jensen. Of course. The Rebecca Lynn Jensen, 70%. Natalie Brooke Jensen, 30%. I felt the room go very quiet inside my head. 70-30. My father had adored fairness. He used to split everything exactly in half, even when we were kids. I remembered him breaking it carefully and saying, "Equal means peaceful." So this wasn't his doing. This was my mother's. Layer 2 was forming. Documentation. Manipulation disguised as legality. I kept my voice neutral. Why didn't I know about this earlier? My mother smiled, that thin, tight smile she used when she believed she held all the power. I was 15 when my father died. Old enough to understand death. Old enough to understand inheritance. Old enough to understand being excluded. Rebecca chimed in casually. You wouldn't. Independent. In our family, that word meant, we can take from you without asking. I flipped through the pages. There were amendments. 3 of them. All dated after I turned 25. All signed by my mother. One amendment added a clause requiring financial contribution from beneficiaries to maintain trust assets. I read that line twice. Financial contribution. Not optional. Not defined. Just required. And suddenly, something snapped into place. The yearly Christmas gifts, the increasing amounts, the guilt, the pressure. They weren't framed as payments. But legally, they could be argued as fulfilling that clause. My mother was building a paper trail, one where my money wasn't generosity. It was obligation. And if I ever stopped paying, she could claim I was failing to support the trust, which meant she could potentially remove me as beneficiary. I closed the binder gently. You should be grateful, my mother said. There it was again. Gratitude, always demanded, never reciprocated. You still get 30% of her property worth at least $600,000, she continued. Most daughters would appreciate that. 30% of a house I was already financially tied to, without consent. A house I had unknowingly helped refinance. A house that was carrying debt in my name. I looked up at her. Did you refinance the house 18 months ago? The air changed instantly. Rebecca stopped scrolling. My mother's fingers tightened slightly on the table. Why are you asking that? She said. Not denial. Deflection, which told me everything. I saw the public record, I said calmly. There was a long silence. Then Rebecca scoffed. You're being dramatic. It was just paperwork. Just paperwork. $400,000 of debt tied to my credit. Just paperwork. My mother leaned forward. That refinance saved the house. It benefited you, too. Benefit. That word felt almost obscene. Did I sign those documents? I asked. Her eyes didn't meet mine. You authorized it, she said vaguely. I hadn't. Not knowingly. Not willingly. Not ever. But I didn't argue. Not yet, because confronting them without preparation would only lead to denial. And denial was exactly where they still were. Instead, I asked the most important question. Why was Rebecca's credit card debt included in the refinance? That landed like a dropped plate. Rebecca's face flushed instantly. My mother's voice sharpened. That was family support. Family support. $96,000, erased using my credit. I nodded slowly. Then I said something that made both of them stiffen. I've hired an attorney. The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca's mouth opened slightly. My mother blinked once, twice. Then came phase 1 of every guilty person's reaction. Denial. You're overreacting, she said quickly. This is normal family financial planning. Normal. Forgery. Hidden debt. Manipulated trust amendments. Normal. I stood up calmly. I'm not accusing anyone, I said. Not yet. I just want clarity. And that was true. Because clarity was coming, but it wasn't going to come from them. It was going to come from documents, from records, from people who weren't emotionally invested in protecting lies. As I turned to leave, Rebecca said something quietly, almost under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. You should be careful pushing this. You might end up with nothing. Nothing. That word lingered in my mind all the way to my car, because she sounded confident, too confident, like someone who believed the outcome was already secured. And that's when I realized something even more disturbing than the refinance. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of something else. Something buried deeper in the paperwork. Something I hadn't uncovered yet. And if Rebecca was right, there was a reason she believed I could end up with nothing at all. On January 18th at 2:42 p.m., my attorney circled a paragraph in red ink and said, "This clause wasn't just amended. It was engineered. The consultation cost me $5,000 up front and $350 per hour after that. Worth it, because within 20 minutes, I realized this was never about a house. It was about leverage. His name was Daniel Harper Whitmore, mid-40s, calm, meticulous, the kind of man who reads every comma like it's a loaded weapon. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the amendment page again. The contribution clause is intentionally vague, he said. There's no defined minimum, no schedule, no cap. I nodded. So they can claim I'm underpaying at any time. Yes, he said simply. That word hit harder than I expected. Yes. Layer 2 was expanding. Paper trails don't scream. They whisper. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The bigger issue is the refinance. If you truly didn't sign these documents, we're looking at potential fraud. But proving intent matters. Intent. I thought about my mother's face when I asked about the refinance. The flicker. The deflection. He continued. I'll need to subpoena the original loan application file. Wet signatures. Digital timestamps. Not just copies. How long will that take? 30 to 60 days. 60 days. 2 months of pretending everything was normal. 2 months of my mother thinking she was still in control. I drove home in silence. Minneapolis in January is brutally honest. Gray sky, dirty snow piled on curbs. No illusions. That night my mother texted me, "Have you calmed down? Calm down." As if hiring legal counsel was a tantrum. I didn't respond. Instead, I ran something I should have run years ago. A full financial analysis of every transfer I had sent her. Bank statements, Zelle records, wire confirmations. In 6 years, I had transferred exactly $418,200 to my mother. $418,200. Not counting birthday gifts, not counting small emergency Venmo requests, just the big December transfers. If you're listening right now and you've ever financially supported family out of guilt, I need you to hear this clearly. Support is voluntary. Control is repetitive. And repetition creates expectation. Expectation creates entitlement. By the 3rd week of January, things escalated quietly. My credit monitoring service alerted me to another inquiry. Different lender. Same pattern as 6 months ago. Someone was trying again. This time, I didn't just sit with it. I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring. "What now?" she sighed. "I received another credit inquiry," I said calmly. Silence. Then, phase 2. Blame. "You're paranoid," she snapped. "Not everything revolves around you." I let the quiet stretch. "You were not authorized to use my credit," I said evenly. "We're family," she shot back. "Why are you acting like a stranger?" "Because family doesn't forge signatures. Because family doesn't hide debt. Because family doesn't slap you over $10,000 after you've given them $400,000. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said something simple. Any further unauthorized use will be formally disputed. There was a shift in her breathing. She wasn't used to boundaries. She was used to compliance. Rebecca called me later that night. Her tone was different. Soft. Strategic. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said. "Mom is stressed." $96,000 of credit card debt stressed? Or getting caught stressed? "You knew about the refinance," I said quietly. She hesitated half a second too long. "It benefited all of us." There it was again. Benefit. I laughed softly. "For who?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she delivered phase 3. Victim mode. "You've always resented me," she said. "This is about jealousy." Jealousy. Of what? Her unpaid debt? Her dependency? Her 70%? It was almost impressive how seamlessly she shifted narratives. But something else in her voice caught my attention. Not fear. Not anger. Confidence. Like someone who believed the legal structure was airtight. Like someone who believed I had no leverage. Which meant one of two things. Either they had falsified more than just my signature, or there was another document I hadn't seen yet. The next week, Daniel called me. "We obtained preliminary metadata from the digital submission file," he said, "and the IP address used to submit your signature originates from your mother's home." I closed my eyes. Layer 2 had just grown teeth. "Is that enough?" I asked. "Not yet," he said, "but it's a start." A start. The word felt like the first inhale before a storm. 2 days later, something else arrived. Certified mail. From a private lender in St. Paul. Inside was a pre-approval notice addressed to me for a home equity line of credit based on the Jensen property. Amount requested, $150,000. Application status: pending additional documentation. I never applied, but someone had. And this time, they were aiming higher. $150,000. That wasn't maintenance. That wasn't debt consolidation. That was extraction. I drove to my mother's house without calling. The porch light was on. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. Through the window, I saw them both at the kitchen counter, laughing, relaxed, like nothing was wrong. I knocked. Hard. My mother opened the door slowly. Her expression shifted when she saw my face. "What is it now?" she said. I held up the envelope. "Who applied for a $150,000 line of credit in my name for the first time since Christmas Eve." She didn't have an immediate answer, and in that half-second of hesitation, I saw it. Not anger, not guilt, fear. But it wasn't fear of me. It was fear of something else, something bigger, something already in motion. And that was the moment I realized the refinance might not have been the original problem. It might have been a cover for something they hadn't told me yet. On January 29th, at exactly 7:58 p.m., my mother looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're misunderstanding everything." Just seconds after I placed the $150,000 credit application letter on her kitchen counter, her voice was steady. Too steady. That was the first time I realized something critical about her. When she lied, she didn't panic. She simplified. And simplification is the most dangerous form of deception because it sounds reasonable. Rebecca was standing behind her, leaning against the refrigerator, arms crossed. Her expression wasn't defensive. It was irritated. Like I had interrupted something more important than financial fraud. "You're acting crazy again," she said. Again. That word landed sharply because it implied a pattern, a narrative, one I hadn't even realized they'd been building. Before I responded, "Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how quickly toxic families label you dramatic the moment you start asking factual questions? Because that's not an accident. It's a strategy." I kept my tone neutral. "I never applied for this," I said, tapping the envelope. My mother sighed loudly, as if exhausted by my presence. "It was just a preliminary inquiry," she said. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Except my credit had been used. Except a lender believed I was requesting a 6-figure loan. Except this was the third time my identity had been touched without permission. "That's not how credit works," I said calmly. Rebecca rolled her eyes. "You benefit from the house too, Natalie. Stop pretending you don't. Benefit." There it was again. That word had become their shield. I walked past them into the living room without asking permission. The same couch, the same rug, the same coffee table where I'd first seen the trust documents weeks ago. And that's when something clicked. The house itself. Everything revolved around it. Not just emotionally, financially, legally. Control of that house meant control of leverage, which meant control of me. I turned back to them. "How much debt is actually tied to this property?" I asked. Silence. My mother's jaw tightened. Rebecca looked away. That silence was louder than any answer. Phase 1 had already passed denial. Phase 2 was happening now. Blame. "You're the one making this complicated," my mother snapped. "If you would just cooperate, we wouldn't be in this situation." Cooperate. As if fraud required teamwork. As if consent was a technicality. I nodded slowly. "Cooperate with what?" She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw the truth beginning to leak through. "Rebecca is starting a business," she said finally. A business. Rebecca, who hadn't held a stable job longer than 6 months in her life. "What kind of business?" I asked. Rebecca answered this time. "A wellness studio." I waited. Because people revealing partial truths often fill silence with more. She did. "It's an investment opportunity. We just need temporary capital." Temporary. That word is always a lie in family finances. "How much capital?" I asked. Rebecca's eyes flickered toward my mother. Then she said it. $200,000. $200,000. The refinance had already absorbed nearly $400,000 in total debt. Now they wanted $200 more, and they weren't asking. They were positioning. Layer 2 was expanding rapidly. Documentation, legal structures, paper trails being quietly assembled to justify extraction. You plan to use the home equity line, I said. My mother didn't deny it this time. Instead, she shifted to phase 3, victim mode. You're supposed to help your family, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. After everything we sacrificed for you. Sacrifice. I thought about working at 13, paying my own tuition loans, funding their lifestyle. Sacrifice had always flowed in one direction, from me. I took a slow breath. This stops now, I said quietly. The words felt heavy. Final. Rebecca's expression hardened instantly. You don't get to decide that, she said sharply. And that sentence revealed something crucial. They didn't see this as a request. They saw it as an entitlement, an ongoing system, one they believed I was obligated to maintain. My mother leaned forward. If you refuse to support the trust, she said slowly, you can be removed as a beneficiary. There it was, the threat, legal, calculated, prepared long before tonight. I didn't react emotionally, because Daniel had already explained the scenario. Yes, he told me during our last meeting, she can attempt to remove you, but doing so triggers mandatory disclosure of all trust financial records. Disclosure. That word had become my quiet weapon. I met her gaze calmly. Then do it, I said. The room went very still. Rebecca blinked. My mother's face strained slightly of color, because she hadn't expected compliance. She had expected panic. You would walk away from your inheritance? Rebecca said incredulously. Inheritance. I almost smiled, because by now I understood something they didn't realize I knew. The trust wasn't protecting me, it was protecting them. And if it collapsed, so would their control. I don't want anything tied to fraud, I said quietly. My mother's composure cracked for the first time. You're making a huge mistake, she whispered. Maybe. Or maybe I was making my first correct decision in 30 years. I picked up my coat and walked toward the door. Behind me, Rebecca said something in a low, urgent voice, something she probably thought I wouldn't hear. Mom, if she pulls out now, the audit will happen. Audit. The word stopped me mid-step. I didn't turn around. I didn't react. But inside, everything went cold. Audit meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant records. And records meant one terrifying possibility. There was more hidden than just refinance fraud and credit misuse. Much more. And whatever it was, they were afraid it would surface if I stopped playing my role. I walked out into the freezing Minnesota night without another word. But one thought kept repeating in my mind with absolute clarity. This was never just about money. It was about something they had been hiding for years. Something buried deep enough that an audit could destroy them. And I was starting to realize I had been unknowingly protecting that secret my entire life. On February 3rd at 6:33 a.m., I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus before I even got out of bed. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. 7 minutes, 3 confirmation numbers, 1 quiet line drawn in the sand. No more access. No more inquiries. No more pretending this was confusion instead of strategy. If you've ever had to protect yourself from the very people who raised you, you know how surreal that feels. It's not dramatic. It's administrative. Cold. Clinical. And that morning, I decided something else, too. I wasn't going to chase answers anymore. I was going to let the system pull them out. Daniel called me later that afternoon. I filed a formal demand for trust accounting, he said. My mother now had 30 days to provide full financial disclosure of the Jensen family revocable trust. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every amendment. If she failed to comply, we could petition the court for enforcement, which meant court-ordered review, which meant audit. Now I understood Rebecca's panic the other night. If she pulls out now, the audit will happen. Pulls out. They didn't mean emotionally. They meant financially. I was the largest funding source attached to that trust. If I stopped contributing, the structure destabilized. And destabilization attracts attention. 3 days later, my mother called. She didn't start with anger. She started with softness. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said. Her voice had that familiar tremble, carefully measured vulnerability. I used to fall for it every time. I'm asking for transparency, I replied. You don't trust your own family? Trust. That word had become almost ironic. I trusted you with $400,000, I said calmly. That's not the issue. Silence. Then she pivoted. You're going to embarrass us. Embarrass. Not hurt. Not damage. Embarrass. That told me everything. This wasn't about financial survival. It was about exposure. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Rebecca texted me. Not a confrontation. Not a guilt trip. An invitation. Let's talk alone. No lawyers, just sisters. That line might have worked 5 years ago. Now it sounded like negotiation. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Public place. Cameras. Neutral ground. She arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a tailored coat I recognized instantly. Burberry. Retail price, around $2,100. Interesting for someone who supposedly needed temporary capital. She didn't waste time. You don't understand how much pressure Mom is under, she began. Pressure from what? That was the question. She's trying to keep everything together. Everything. Vague again. I stirred my coffee slowly. Then she should show me the books. Rebecca's jaw tightened. It's complicated. Complicated is what people say when the truth is ugly. Try me, I said. She leaned forward slightly. There are investors involved. That word changed the temperature instantly. Investors? In what? I asked quietly. She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I understood. The property, she said finally. The property. The house? I clarified. She nodded once. It's part of a larger development plan. Development plan. I felt my pulse slow again. Not from fear, but from clarity. How large? I asked. She exhaled slowly. There's a preliminary agreement with a regional builder. They're buying several adjacent properties. Ours is strategically located. Strategically located. Now. It made sense. The refinance, the equity extraction attempt, the increasing pressure for contributions. If the house was part of a future development acquisition, its value wasn't $600,000. It was far higher. How much? I asked. She looked at me directly for the first time. Preliminary estimate is $2.8 million. $2.8 million. I didn't react outwardly, but inside, everything rearranged. The 70-30 split suddenly mattered more. The refinance suddenly looked like leverage. And the equity line? Liquidity before sale. When was this agreement signed? I asked. She hesitated again. About 2 years ago. 2 years. Which meant the refinance 18 months ago happened after the development interest, not before. Layer 3 was starting to reveal its shape. This wasn't random debt management. This was strategic positioning before a sale. And if my name was tied to the mortgage, my consent might be required for transfer. Unless the trust structure allowed the trustee unilateral authority. Does the builder know about the refinance? I asked. Rebecca's eyes flickered. Yes, that one word told me something critical. This wasn't just family manipulation. This involved external parties, contracts, deadlines, performance clauses. And if I disrupted it, I wasn't just threatening my mother. I was threatening a deal worth nearly $3 million, which explained the fear, which explained the urgency, which explained the slap. You were going to use my credit to stabilize the property before sale, I said calmly. Rebecca didn't deny it this time. It benefits all of us, she repeated quietly. But now I understood the real translation. It benefits them. Because if the trust distributes 70% to Rebecca, 70% of $2.8 million is $1.96 million. Almost $2 million. My 30%? $840,000. On paper, assuming the debt attached didn't erode it first. Assuming no further contribution clauses were invoked. Assuming I stayed compliant. You should have told me, I said. Rebecca's face hardened again. You would have complicated it. Complicated. Meaning, asked questions. Meaning, disrupted control. I stood up. There's no sale without full accounting, I said evenly. She stood too. You're going to ruin this. Maybe. Or maybe I was about to uncover something even bigger. Because one question still hadn't been answered. If the house was under preliminary development agreement 2 years ago, why was the refinance amount so high? $420,000 wasn't minor cleanup. It was heavy leverage. And leverage before sale often means one thing: Someone already spent money they didn't actually have yet. And if that was true, the trust might not just be manipulated. It might be insolvent, which would mean the $2.8 million wasn't profit. It was cover. And if I forced disclosure, the entire structure could collapse. Not just emotionally, legally. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I wasn't the one at risk anymore. On February 14th, at exactly 5:12 p.m., I received a FedEx envelope marked Final Notice. Trust accounting response required. It had been 30 days since Daniel filed the demand. 30 days of silence from my mother. No documents, no statements, no explanation. Silence is never neutral in financial disputes. Silence is strategy. And this silence was loud because legally, failure to respond triggered escalation. Court petition. Judicial review. Audit. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't react emotionally at all. For the first time in my life, I simply withdrew. Not physically, not financially. That had already happened. Emotionally. I stopped answering casual messages. Stopped responding to holiday photos. Stopped participating in the quiet choreography of family obligation. I became still. And stillness, in toxic systems, is terrifying because control requires movement. Resistance creates tension. But silence? Silence removes their leverage entirely. If you've ever tried stepping back instead of fighting, you know what happens. At first, they escalate. Then, they probe. Then, they panic. Rebecca called me 4 times that week. I let it go to voicemail every time. Her messages shifted tone with each call. First irritation. Just talk to Mom. Then urgency. We need to resolve this before the deadline. Then something closer to fear. You don't understand the consequences. Consequences. Interesting word, because I was starting to understand them very clearly. Daniel confirmed it 2 days later. They missed the deadline, he said. We're filing a petition for compelled accounting. What happens next? I asked. The court orders full financial disclosure. If they still fail to comply, a forensic accountant can be appointed. Forensic. That word landed heavily. Forensic accounting isn't routine bookkeeping. It's investigation, tracing money flows, identifying irregularities, exposing misrepresentation. And suddenly, Rebecca's earlier sentence echoed again in my mind. If she pulls out now, the audit will happen. It wasn't a warning. It was a fear response. Because an audit doesn't just reveal numbers. It reveals intent. 3 days later, something else happened. Something small, but telling. My mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. She hadn't done that since I moved out at 18. She looked different. Not angry. Not confident. Tired. Like someone running out of time. I just want to talk, she said quietly when I opened the door. I didn't invite her in immediately. Boundaries aren't about hostility. They're about clarity. What do you want to say? I asked. Her eyes softened. You're destroying this family. There it was. The reframing. Not you're exposing wrongdoing. Not you're asking for transparency. You're destroying. Because accountability always feels like destruction to those benefiting from secrecy. I asked for documents, I said calmly. You're humiliating us, she whispered. Again, humiliation. Exposure. Reputation. Those were her true fears. Not finances. Not relationships. Visibility. She stepped closer. You don't understand how complicated this is, she said. That word again. Complicated. People use it when the truth can't survive simplicity. Then explain it, I replied quietly. For a moment, she looked like she might finally say something honest. But then, her shoulders stiffened, and she chose control instead. You signed those papers, she said sharply. The lie landed differently this time. Not shocking. Not painful. Just expected. No, I said calmly. I didn't. Her voice rose. You authorized everything by continuing to contribute. There it was. The legal narrative. She wasn't denying misuse. She was reframing consent. As long as I kept sending money, she could argue implied approval. That's why the yearly transfers mattered. Not emotionally. Legally. You used my identity, I said quietly. She didn't deny it. She shifted again. You owe this family, she snapped. And in that moment, I realized something profound. She didn't actually believe she was wrong. In her mind, she wasn't stealing. She was reallocating. Family resources, family hierarchy, family entitlement. Rebecca was the future. I was the funding source. That was the system she had always operated under. And now that system was collapsing because I had stopped moving. I had stopped negotiating. I had stopped explaining. I had simply stepped out. Silence isn't passive, it's strategic absence. After a long pause, she said something quietly, something she clearly hadn't meant to reveal. If the accounting happens, you'll hurt more than just us. I held her gaze. Who else? I asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said something even more revealing. There are contracts involved. Contracts. Plural. External parties. Legal obligations. Penalties. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a future development sale. It was about binding agreements already in motion. Agreements that might collapse if the trust's financial reality came to light. Then you should have told me 2 years ago, I said calmly. Her eyes flashed with something close to desperation. You would have ruined it. That sentence told me everything. Transparency had never been an option because the plan required ignorance, my ignorance. She left shortly after that. No resolution. No apology, just quiet, growing tension. That night, Daniel emailed me. The court had accepted our petition. Hearing date scheduled in 3 weeks. 3 weeks until forced disclosure. 3 weeks until the numbers surfaced. 3 weeks until whatever they were hiding would be pulled into daylight. And as I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the notification, one realization settled heavily into place. This was no longer just a family conflict. This was a financial structure built on concealment. And once the audit began, it wouldn't just expose what they did to me. It would expose what they had done with the money after they took it. On March 2nd, at exactly 9:03 a.m., Daniel slid a single spreadsheet across his desk and said, "This is where the money actually went." It wasn't thick. It wasn't dramatic. Just one printed page filled with dates, transfers, and account numbers. But in that moment, it felt heavier than any legal binder I had seen so far. Because this wasn't theory anymore. This was movement. And movement tells the truth. I stared at the columns. Deposit dates matched almost perfectly with my yearly December transfers. $40,000. December 22nd, 3 years ago. $55,000. December 19th, 2 years ago. $60,000. December 24th. Last year. $50,000, Christmas Eve. Each one landed in a trust account. But within days, sometimes within hours, the money moved again. Not to mortgage payments, not to maintenance, not to property taxes. It moved somewhere else. Daniel tapped one specific column, wire transfers to a limited liability company, he said. The name read, Northridge Urban Development, LLC. My stomach tightened. That's the builder? I asked. Yes, he said. But not exactly. Not exactly. Those 2 words hung in the air because they implied something layered, something indirect. What do you mean? I asked. He leaned back slightly. This isn't a traditional purchase agreement. It's a speculative investment structure. Speculative, meaning risk, meaning uncertainty, meaning money flows before guaranteed returns. He continued, Your mother didn't just plan to sell the house. She invested in the development project itself. I blinked. You mean she put the trust money into the builder? Yes. My mind replayed Rebecca's words. There are investors involved. I had assumed she meant outside buyers, not my mother. Not the trust. How much? I asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned the page over, and there it was. Total outgoing transfers from the trust to Northridge Urban Development over 2 years. $683,000. $683,000. My breath left my lungs slowly. That number was bigger than everything I had imagined. It wasn't just my contributions. It included the refinance funds, which meant the refinance hadn't just been about debt. It had been about capital injection. My mother had leveraged the house and my credit to invest nearly $700,000 into a speculative real estate development, without telling me, without consent, and with trust assets. Layer 3 was fully emerging now. Not just betrayal, not just documentation, financial exposure. Legal consequences. Is that illegal? I asked quietly. Daniel chose his words carefully. It depends on whether it violated fiduciary duty as trustee. Fiduciary duty, the legal obligation to act in beneficiaries' best interests. If she invested trust funds into high-risk ventures without disclosure or consent, he continued, that could be considered breach of fiduciary duty. Breach. That word landed like a quiet explosion, because breach meant liability, personal liability. For the trustee, for my mother. But it gets more complicated, Daniel added. More complicated. Of course. Northridge Urban Development hasn't broken ground yet, he said. What does that mean? I asked. It means the project isn't generating returns. No returns. My pulse slowed, because now the refinance made perfect sense. The equity line attempt made sense. The pressure for contributions made sense. They weren't preparing for profit. They were covering a loss. How much is the investment currently worth? I asked. Daniel paused. Then he said quietly, based on current filings, it's valued at zero. Zero. The word echoed in my head. $683,000. Gone. Not stolen in a traditional sense, but placed into something that had not produced a single dollar back, which meant the trust wasn't just leveraged, it was effectively empty. The house itself remained, but it was carrying heavy debt, and the trust's liquid assets were gone, which meant something else. If the development deal failed entirely, the trust might not just lose potential profit, it could collapse. And if that happened, creditors could pursue repayment, including the mortgage tied to my name. I sat back slowly. This is why she needed more equity, I said. Daniel nodded. She needed liquidity to sustain the investment until development approvals came through. Approvals, permits, zoning, all slow processes, all uncertain. How likely is the project to succeed? I asked. He didn't sugarcoat it. Right now, very low. Silence filled the office, because now everything was clear. The slap, the pressure, the secrecy. They weren't trying to build wealth. They were trying to avoid collapse. Rebecca wasn't expecting $2 million. She was trying to prevent losing everything. And they had used me as a financial buffer, without telling me, without choice. Daniel spoke again. There's one more issue. Of course there was. Because your credit is tied to the mortgage, he said. If the trust becomes insolvent, lenders could pursue you as co-borrower. There it was, the real risk. Not losing inheritance, not losing family ties, losing financial stability, my future, my credit, everything I had built. And suddenly, my mother's earlier warning made perfect sense. If the accounting happens, you'll hurt more than just us. She hadn't been threatening me emotionally. She had been warning me financially. If the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just expose her, it would reveal how deeply I was entangled. I looked at Daniel. What happens if I prove fraud in the refinance? His answer came without hesitation. You could potentially be released from liability entirely. Released. Free. From the debt, from the trust, from their financial system. But proving fraud required something critical, intent. And that meant documentation, signatures, digital records, proof she knowingly acted without consent. Daniel slid another document toward me. The subpoena response from the lender arrived this morning. I looked down. At the digital submission log, at the timestamp, at the IP address, and then at the login credentials used to upload my signature. Because the username wasn't my email. It wasn't my name. It was an account registered under a different identity, one that made my entire chest go cold. Because it wasn't my mother's. It was Rebecca's. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just my mother manipulating finances. Rebecca hadn't been a passive beneficiary. She had been actively involved from the beginning, which meant the betrayal wasn't one generation deep. It was shared, calculated, and far more intentional than I had allowed myself to believe. On March 6th, at exactly 4:26 p.m., I stared at the login credential attached to the refinance submission and realized my sister hadn't just benefited from the fraud she had executed it. The username was simple, rjensen.consulting@gmail.com. Rebecca didn't even bother disguising it. Consulting. That word almost made me laugh. Because if identity theft counted as consulting, she had certainly been active. Daniel didn't speak immediately. He let the weight of it settle. "You understand what this means," he said finally. "Yes," I replied quietly. It meant intent. It meant coordination. It meant this wasn't a desperate mother acting alone. It was a partnership. And that shifted something inside me, permanently. Because betrayal from one person can be rationalized. Betrayal from two becomes structure. Let me ask you something. What hurts more, being used by a parent or realizing your sibling helped? Because I thought I had already reached the lowest emotional point on Christmas Eve. I was wrong. This was colder, not louder, not dramatic, just clean and irreversible. Daniel tapped the timestamp. The refinance documents were uploaded at 11:48 p.m. on a Tuesday, he said, from your mother's home IP address, using Rebecca's registered account. So they were both there, I said. Yes, coordination, planning, execution, not confusion, not misunderstanding, deliberate action. And the equity line attempt, I asked? We're still waiting on that lender's full file, he said, but I suspect similar mechanics. I nodded slowly, because now I wasn't reacting, I was mapping. There are three kinds of revenge: emotional, financial, strategic. Emotional revenge explodes and fades. Financial revenge compensates. Strategic revenge restructures the power dynamic permanently. And I wasn't interested in screaming anymore. I wanted structural correction. That night, I didn't call Rebecca. I didn't text my mother. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop and began building a timeline. Every December, transfer. Every refinance filing. Every trust amendment. Every credit inquiry. I listed dates, amounts, and movements. It looked less like a family history and more like a forensic report. And the pattern became undeniable. Year 1. Large transfer from me to partial mortgage payment to small investment into development. Year 2. Larger transfer to refinance initiated to major capital injection into development. Year 3. Even larger transfer to no returns from development to increased pressure for contributions. Year 4. Attempted equity line to failed to escalation. They weren't planning for profit. They were buying time. Buying time until zoning approval. Until external investors came in. Until the speculative value materialized. And if it didn't, they needed me. Which meant the slap on Christmas Eve wasn't about $10,000. It was about liquidity shortage. I remembered Rebecca's words again. If you can't afford to take care of us properly, meaning fully, meaning consistently, meaning indefinitely. I closed my laptop and sat back. There was something else bothering me, something subtle. If the development was valued at 0 currently, and the trust had poured nearly $700,000 into it, where did the rest of the refinance money go? Because $420,000 refinance, plus my yearly transfers, didn't equal $683,000 cleanly. There were gaps. Daniel had noticed it too. The numbers don't reconcile perfectly, he had said earlier. There are missing segments. Missing segments. That phrase echoed. Money doesn't evaporate. It moves. And if it doesn't appear on one account, it appears somewhere else. The next morning, Daniel called again. We received partial bank statements from the trust's operating account, he said. Partial? I asked. Yes, only 18 months worth. We requested 5 years. Selective disclosure. Which meant they were still trying to control narrative. What stands out? I asked. He paused. There are repeated transfers labeled consulting fees. Consulting. The same word from Rebecca's email. How much? I asked quietly. Approximately $214,000 over 2 years. $214,000 paid out as consulting fees. To whom? I already knew the answer before he said it. To Rebecca Jensen. There it was, the missing segment. The development investment wasn't the only drain. Rebecca had been paying herself from the trust, under the guise of consulting, for a development project that hadn't produced returns. I closed my eyes slowly. This wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was self-dealing. And self-dealing, when done by someone influencing a trustee, edges dangerously close to legal liability. Is that defensible? I asked. Daniel's answer was blunt. Not if she provided no measurable services. No measurable services. Rebecca, who had never successfully completed a business venture in her life, had somehow earned $214,000 in consulting fees from a trust funded largely by me. The betrayal wasn't emotional anymore. It was mathematical. And math doesn't lie. I felt something shift inside me again. Not rage, not heartbreak. Resolution. There's a sentence forming in my mind that I know will one day be said out loud. Love without accountability becomes exploitation. I don't know exactly when I'll say it, but I know where. The hearing was scheduled in 10 days. Public courtroom, formal record, sworn testimony, which meant something critical. They would have to answer under oath. No simplification. No emotional manipulation. No, you're overreacting. Just facts. And if the forensic accounting revealed unauthorized refinance, breach of fiduciary duty, and self-dealing, the consequences wouldn't just be financial. They could be criminal. I wasn't seeking prison. I wasn't seeking destruction. I was seeking release. Release from liability. Release from obligation. Release from a system designed to use me. But there was still one unanswered question. Why had Rebecca been so confident? Why had she believed I could end up with nothing? Because based on the numbers, if the trust collapsed, she stood to lose more than I did. Unless there was another document, another clause, something buried deeper than the refinance. Something that shifted risk disproportionately onto me. And if that was true, the hearing wouldn't just expose fraud. It would reveal the final layer, the one they had been counting on me never finding. On March 18th, at exactly 10:14 a.m., my mother raised her right hand in a Hennepin County courtroom and swore to tell the truth, while knowing the forensic ledger sat 3 feet away from her. There were 27 people in the gallery, 2 reporters, 1 local developer, and Rebecca, wearing a navy blazer, like this was a board meeting instead of a reckoning. Public settings change power dynamics. Living rooms allow gaslighting. Courtrooms require answers. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If the people who used you had to speak under oath, would you want front row seats? Or would you rather not watch? Because I watched. Every blink, every hesitation. Daniel sat beside me, composed as always. Across the aisle, Northridge Urban Development's legal counsel had shown up voluntarily. That detail mattered, because it meant the development deal was already nervous. The judge, Honorable Patricia Klein, reviewed the petition summary calmly. Petitioner alleges unauthorized refinance, breach of fiduciary duty, and improper disbursement of trust funds, she said evenly. No emotion, just facts. My mother, Carol Ann Jensen, adjusted her glasses. Phase 1 began instantly. Denial. I have always acted in the best interest of my daughters, she said. Always. Absolute language is dangerous in court. Daniel didn't raise his voice when he responded. Did you disclose the $683,000 in development transfers to Ms. Natalie Jensen? My mother hesitated. For investment growth, she said vaguely. That wasn't the question, Daniel replied calmly. Did you disclose them? Silence. The judge looked up. Yes or no? No, my mother said quietly. There it was. Layer 3 was fully exposed now. Rebecca shifted in her seat. Daniel continued. Did you authorize the refinance using Natalie Jensen's credit without written consent? I believed she understood, my mother replied. Belief is not consent. Daniel slid the digital submission log into evidence. Is this your home IP address? Yes. Is this email account associated with Rebecca Jensen? A pause. Yes. Every yes tightened the room. Rebecca's turn came next. She approached the stand with confidence. Too much confidence. Phase 2 began. Blame. Natalie benefited from the trust structure, she said. She contributed voluntarily. Voluntarily. Daniel didn't react. He displayed the trust amendment clause on the screen. Is it correct that this clause requiring financial contribution was added after Ms. Natalie Jensen began earning full-time income? Yes, Rebecca said carefully. And was that clause ever explicitly defined in writing? No. The gallery murmured softly. Rebecca's composure shifted slightly. Daniel moved to the consulting fees. Can you describe the services rendered for $214,000 in payments to yourself? I advised on development strategy, she said. Do you have invoices? No. Written contracts? No. Project silence. The judge leaned forward slightly. Rebecca attempted phase 3. Victim mode. "We were trying to build something for all of us," she said, voice tightening. "Natalie is sabotaging our family's future." That sentence might have worked at Christmas dinner. It didn't work under oath. "Daniel, is it correct that the current development valuation is 0? Rebecca swallowed. "Yes. And is it correct that if the trust is insolvent, creditors may pursue co-borrowers on the mortgage?" She didn't answer. The judge did. "Yes, that is correct." The entire dynamic shifted in that moment. Because now, it was clear. I wasn't sabotaging a fortune. I was preventing collapse. Northridge's attorney requested permission to speak. That surprised everyone. He stood and said something that froze the room. "The development agreement requires clear title and full beneficiary consent prior to acquisition." Full beneficiary consent, meaning me. "If Ms. Jensen withdraws support," he continued, "the purchase agreement becomes void." Void. Rebecca's face lost color. My mother's hands trembled slightly. Because now, the truth was public. They hadn't just invested recklessly. They had leveraged my compliance as a condition for sale. They needed me silent. They needed me cooperative. They needed me unaware. Without my signature, there was no $2.8 million exit. And without that exit, there was no recovery. The judge ordered full forensic accounting within 30 days. All 5 years. All accounts. All transfers. Court-appointed accountant. Non-compliance would trigger sanctions. Possibly criminal referral. Criminal referral. The words echoed heavily. I wasn't seeking jail. But I wasn't protecting them anymore either. As we exited the courtroom, Rebecca grabbed my arm. Hard. "You've destroyed everything," she hissed. I looked at her calmly. "No," I said evenly. "You destroyed it when you used my name." That's one of those sentences that will probably get clipped someday. Because it's simple and true. Outside, reporters hovered lightly, but respectfully. A family trust dispute doesn't usually draw headlines, but development money does. Northridge's attorney avoided eye contact. My mother didn't speak. Rebecca didn't cry. She didn't rage, she calculated. And that's what unsettled me most. Because collapse doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like quiet re-strategizing. As Daniel and I walked to his car, he said something that stopped me cold. "There's one more filing that came in this morning." "What filing?" I asked. He hesitated. "A contingency transfer agreement." My stomach tightened. "From who?" "Your mother." "And what does it say?" He exhaled slowly. "If the development deal fails, the remaining trust assets, including future sale proceeds, may be reassigned to satisfy outstanding consulting obligations." Consulting obligations. Rebecca. Which meant even if the house sold later, her payouts were contractually prioritized. Above mine. That was the missing layer. That was why she had been confident. Even in collapse, she had positioned herself first in line. And if the numbers held, my 30% could shrink to almost nothing. Which meant the real battle wasn't just exposing fraud. It was preventing final extraction. And the forensic audit had just begun. On April 21st, at exactly 2:03 p.m., the court-appointed forensic accountant placed a sealed report on the judge's bench and said, "The trust is insolvent." 2 words. Insolvent. They didn't sound dramatic, but they ended everything. There were fewer people in the courtroom this time. No reporters. No developer representatives. Just me, Daniel, my mother, Rebecca, and the truth. If you've ever waited for a moment where you know the outcome will permanently change relationships, you understand how quiet it feels beforehand. Not tense, not emotional, just still. The accountant, a gray-haired woman named Elaine Porter, spoke in a steady, neutral voice. "Total trust assets over 5 years, $742,000, she said. That included my direct contributions, refinance proceeds, small prior savings from my father. Total disbursements, $741,286, which meant the trust had less than $1,000 remaining, essentially empty. My mother stared at the table. Rebecca stared straight ahead. Elaine continued. Of disbursements, $683,000 were transferred to Northridge Urban Development. We already knew that part. But the next line changed everything. An additional $217,400 were transferred to Rebecca Jensen as consulting payments. The courtroom went silent because the math didn't work. That number exceeded total assets, which meant something critical: debt. Elaine confirmed it. To sustain disbursements beyond available funds, additional unsecured personal loans totaling $158,000 were taken under the trustee's authorization. Unsecured loans, high interest, short terms, which explained the desperation. The refinance hadn't been enough. My contributions hadn't been enough. So my mother borrowed more, using the trust's projected future sale value as justification. And then came the sentence that sealed everything. Because the refinance included Ms. Natalie Jensen as co-borrower without verifiable consent, liability for the mortgage cannot legally attach to her. I exhaled slowly. Released. Financially untangled. That single line erased the biggest risk hanging over me. The judge nodded. Mortgage liability is hereby removed from petitioner, she rolled. Clean. Immediate. Final. Rebecca's shoulders dropped slightly, because now she understood. I wasn't tied to their collapse anymore. They were, Elaine continued. The contingency consulting agreement is invalid due to lack of trust solvency at the time of execution. Rebecca's face lost color, because that clause, the one she had relied on, evaporated in one sentence. Invalid, meaning her priority claim disappeared, meaning she wasn't first in line anymore. There was no line. There was nothing left. Then came the final legal finding. Trustee Carol Ann Jensen is found in breach of fiduciary duty for failure to disclose high-risk investments, unauthorized use of beneficiary identity, and self-dealing facilitation. Breach. Official. On record. The judge imposed remedies, calmly. Trust dissolved. Remaining property placed under court-supervised sale. Proceeds, if any, first used to repay secured debts. Any surplus split equally between beneficiaries. Equally. Not 70-30. Because breach voided amended allocations. 50-50. Rebecca whispered something under her breath. It sounded like, "That's not fair." Fairness. The word almost felt ironic after everything. The judge wasn't finished. Civil penalties against trustee are reserved pending further review, she said, which meant potential personal liability. Not criminal charges yet, but consequences. Real ones. My mother didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't look at me. She just sat there, staring at the empty space where her control used to exist. Rebecca, however, broke. Phase 4. Collapse. "You did this," she said, turning toward me. Her voice wasn't loud. It was hollow. "You could have just waited for the development to go through." Waited. For zoning approvals. For speculative value. For more risk. For more extraction. I met her gaze calmly. "You already spent the future," I said quietly. That's another sentence that will probably get clipped someday, because it summarizes everything. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say, because math had spoken, and math is merciless. Outside the courthouse, spring sunlight felt almost surreal after months of tension. Daniel handed me the final court summary. "You're free from liability," he said. Free. Not emotionally, but legally, financially, structurally. And that mattered. "Will they lose the house?" I asked. He nodded slightly. "Most likely. Sale proceeds will barely cover debt." Barely. Which meant the thing my mother had sacrificed everything to protect was already gone. Just not officially yet. We stood there quietly for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me. "Most trust disputes aren't about money," he said. "They're about control." Control. That word had defined my entire relationship with them. But control only works when one person participates. And I had stopped participating months ago. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "You should have remembered who helped pay for your education." I stared at it for a long moment, because it wasn't from my mother. It wasn't from Rebecca. It was from someone else. Someone I hadn't even considered part of this story. And suddenly, I realized something unsettling. The trust may have collapsed, but the past still held pieces I hadn't fully uncovered yet. On June 30th, at exactly 7:40 p.m., I stood outside my childhood home while a real estate sign was hammered into the front lawn, and I felt absolutely nothing. No triumph, no grief, just quiet. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Peeling white trim, faded shutters, a place that once felt like hierarchy carved into drywall. Now, It was just property, numbers, debt, liquidation. If you followed this story from Christmas Eve to now, you know something important already. Revenge doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like release. The court-supervised sale closed 2 weeks later. Final sale price, $1.03 million. Much lower than the speculative $2.8 million fantasy. Because development zoning had stalled. Because the market had shifted. Because speculative dreams don't pay secured debt. After paying off the refinance balance, the unsecured loans, legal fees, penalties, and closing costs, there was $84,612 remaining, split equally. I received $42,306. That was my inheritance. Not 30%. Not $800,000. $42,000. Do you know what surprised me? I wasn't angry, because I hadn't lost anything. They had. My mother, Carol Ann Jensen, was ordered to personally repay a portion of the unsecured loans due to fiduciary breach. Rebecca's consulting income was reclassified in civil review as improper distribution, which meant repayment negotiations. No prison. No dramatic arrest. Just financial accountability. Karma rarely screams. It invoices. I moved my $42,306 directly into a high-yield savings account. Not as a symbol of victory, as a boundary. Money earned without clarity costs too much. 3 weeks after the sale, I received another message from that unknown number. This time, it included a name. Thomas Adler, my father's former business partner. And suddenly, the final open thread made sense. You should have remembered who helped pay for your education. I met him in a quiet restaurant in Edina. He was older now, gray at the temples, measured in speech. He explained something I had never known. My father had taken a small business loan before he died. Thomas had co-signed it. When my father passed, Thomas absorbed the debt personally to prevent foreclosure. He never told my mother. He never told us. He said something that settled deeply in me. Your father wanted both his daughters independent, not indebted to each other. Independent, not weaponized. The loan had been repaid quietly, over years, through Thomas's restructuring, not through my mother, not through Rebecca, which meant the narrative I'd grown up with, that my family sacrificed everything for my education, wasn't true. It had been another control story. I thanked him. Not dramatically, just honestly. And when I left that dinner, I realized something profound. The past wasn't sacred. It was curated. And now, I had the unedited version. 2 months later, I bought something small. Not a car, not jewelry, not a statement purchase. I bought a modest 2-bedroom condo in Minneapolis. Down payment, $38,000. Mortgage solely in my name. Clean, transparent, no shared signatures, no hidden clauses. On closing day, I sat alone in the empty living room, sunlight coming through wide windows, hardwood floors, quiet. And I said something out loud for the first time. I am not an ATM. I am not an obligation. I am not a resource. That's probably the third sentence that could live on its own, because it's not about money. It's about identity. My mother called once after the sale, not to apologize, to ask if I would reconsider helping her stabilize. I told her calmly, no. No explanation. No anger. No debate. Just no. Boundaries don't require speeches. Rebecca never called. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that her wellness studio never opened, that she moved into a smaller apartment, that she told people I had betrayed the family. Maybe that's the story she needs to survive. But here's the truth. Love without accountability becomes exploitation. Silence without boundaries becomes permission. And generosity without clarity becomes leverage. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, the independent one, the reliable one, let me ask you something. When do you stop being strong for them and start being strong for yourself? Because for me, it wasn't when I was slapped over $10,000. It wasn't when I discovered $700,000 in hidden investments. It wasn't even in the courtroom. It was the moment I stopped explaining. The moment I chose documentation over emotion. The moment I chose structure over guilt. Christmas came again this year. For the first time in my life, I bought myself a gift. Nothing extravagant. Just a simple silver bracelet. I wrapped it, placed it under a small tree in my condo, and on Christmas morning, I opened it alone. No slap, no expectation, no transfer confirmation email, just quiet. Peace is expensive when you grow up in chaos, but once you have it, you don't return it. If this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the quiet provider in a family that only noticed you when money was involved, tell me below. And if you want to hear what happened when Thomas Adler revealed one more thing about my father's will, stay subscribed, because some truths don't surface until you stop funding the silence.